Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Joint Flows. Today we are joined by Jen Igartua. Hopefully I have said that correctly.
You did.
Jen is the CEO of Go Nimbly, and in another life of hers that she lives in parallel, she's also a game maker at Pillbox Games as well. So an interesting mix there. Welcome to the show, Jen. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So do you want to add anything to your introduction? Are you happy with that? Is there anything our listeners need to know?
All very accurate. I'll talk a little bit about, I think what's really fun about running a B2B company and then a B2C company. Yeah. So yes, my day job, CEO of Go Nimbly, we're a revenue operations consultancy. So we work with big brands like Twilio and Zendesk and Intercom, super proud of the companies we work with. And we help operationalize them, all things RevOps. And then nights and weekends, I spend with my friends in Brooklyn selling a $25 game. So very, very different. In fact, when we started making our first game, Side Effects, the manufacturer said it was the most expensive card game they've ever made.
Oh, wow.
And that's not good feedback. That's me getting pitched. What if we put gold foil on it for 3 cents? And I'm like, 3 cents? Yes. It's like when you speak in the dollar amounts that we speak in SaaS, and then you try to pitch me something for 40 cents. I'm saying yes, until all of a sudden, I'm not making any money. Learned our lesson, but it's been very fun.
What's the game about?
It's called Side Effects. So it's actually a game. We made a game about mental disorders. We thought it was like a topic that it's important and people don't talk about it enough. So it's dark humor. Everybody starts out with an array of mental disorders like depression and anxiety and impotence. And you have to be the first to treat yourself with drugs and therapy. But every time you take drugs, you get side effects. I don't know if you have these commercials in the UK, but in the US, every time you have a drug commercial, you have to list all the side effects, and it's like 50% of the commercial. So we were making fun of that.
Fair enough. It sounds interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump straight into it. Let's start more with the RevOps and consultancy to begin with. Maybe we can dig into the game making as well. But obviously you've been at Go Nimbly for over 7 years now, which is great, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of change in that period of time as well. It would be great to start off by talking about some of the changes that you've seen. So in particular, working as more of a consultancy, you work with a number of different softwares and brands across that period of time. How are you seeing RevOps change for the better or the worse, and how is that impacting the outcomes that we're seeing at companies?
Yeah. Well, I'll start even a little before I started Go Nimbly. Before that, I worked at IBM. Like basically, it was a Bluewolf company, and then they got bought by, it was Bluewolf got bought by IBM and became an IBM company. Bluewolf was the first partner with Salesforce. So I started out my career there as marketing automation. I was doing Eloqua and Marketo consulting. And I very quickly realized anything I did in that system was going to affect the sales team and Salesforce. And that's when I started to get really interested, like, why are sales and marketing teams so mad at each other? We should be mad at finance. Like, they're the ones keeping us from getting money. They're the ones that are telling us no. So that's what got me really interested in sales and marketing alignment. And the people angle really interested me, but I slowly realized like a lot of the problems end up being silos that you can find in data or silos that you can find in your technology, things just not integrated. So we started Go Nimbly under the tagline, RevOps didn't exist. The term didn't exist. We started it as unifying the business stack. That was our tagline and the reason we existed. So we did a lot of work integrating products, making sure that your lead flow was working. It was highly technical. And then we started to really push on the people side, did workshops, talked about RevOps strategy. And that's when kind of the RevOps, like a few years later, the RevOps term came up and we were like, that's what we do. And we were the first consulting company to call ourselves a RevOps consultancy and create products around that. And, the things that I've seen, or I'll tell you one thing that I think has been recent and in the last couple of years, and it's big. We used to draw tech maps all the time, and Salesforce was always in the middle, and that's changing. I don't know, Salesforce might get mad at me if they listen to this, but now we're seeing a data warehouse in the middle. Now we're seeing, Salesforce is one of the hubs, and we're not talking about Salesforce being the place where all your data lives. And that's definitely a big change. Obviously, a lot of work behind making that a smooth process for everyone. But that's the latest client that we had where we're implementing their entire customer stack. We did not put Salesforce in the middle. And I remember being like, okay, these flow diagrams are looking different.
Yeah, it's something we are noticing as well. So we help RevOps teams and commercial revenue teams, but there's always a question about what's the main system of records and where do you actually see and visualize your data. And one of the companies we were speaking to earlier in the week had a BI tool, essentially taking the data out of HubSpot in that case, but also essentially translating other data sets into something that then becomes coherent. Yep. Where do you see, where do you start when you have a project like this? Because it's such a big piece of work.
Oh, if somebody comes to me and they're, early enough where they're saying, look, I don't have much tech. Maybe they've built it on top of their own product. Maybe they're still working out of like Airtable and Notion. They're saying, okay, we're ready for some sort of CRM. This is probably pretty boring. We start with requirements calls, right? We really get down to give me all the use cases that you're thinking. Let's push 1 to 2 years ahead. Tell me other things that you think are going to come up. And then we look at each of those and we say, all right, are these nice to haves? Are these must haves? We look at all the must haves and we say, great, I think this tech stack is going to support you. It used to be a no-brainer. I used to be like, all right, well, you're going to get Salesforce. And then we could do a vendor analysis on marketing automation. Now the conversation is changing. There are teams that can run on HubSpot and HubSpot CRM for a very, very long time. I used to kind of like roll my eyes at it, but they've invested so much. One tool, no integrations, pretty easy to manage. And so, the conversation is a little harder now because we have to really weigh the options of managing, something like Salesforce versus something as easy as HubSpot.
And you've got a lot of experience on product-led growth and all the operational layer sitting underneath. Teach me about the topic as if I was brand new.
Love it. Okay, PLG, product-led growth, not new. We've been doing it for a long time, but we came up with a fancy name for it. So Twilio was our first client. And we didn't have the term product-led growth. Back in 2015, I think is when we started working with them. We did a project with them where the conversation was around developer-first marketing and developer-first mindset. That's what we called it. It was PLG. We were trying to get developers to sign up and use the product, and then they would bring it up to their bosses that they want to use this product. So I give that story because it's not new. Zendesk, free trials campaigns. That's what we built when we worked with them. Again, 2016, I think we worked on that project. We were doing free trial campaigns to try to convert them. We were testing out 15 days versus 30 days. What would that look like? Would it convert? That's PLG. And so I say that because I think we're on the top of the hype curve on PLG right now. And I love it. It's a passion of mine, but it's not new. I think it's important because it makes it feel scary when nobody's done it, but we've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, and you're right. We are at the height of the curve of it. I can feel that as well. What would be the reasons why someone should adopt the strategy as product-led growth?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So the theory, which in some cases has been debunked, but I'll go with the pure theory, is with product-led growth, your platform is selling for you, right? So you'll put more investment in your R&D. You'll spend money there. And then the idea is that you're spending less money on sales team and salespeople, and you're going to have better economies of scale. Some recent data has shown that that's actually not the case. They're overspending on R&D and they're overspending on sales and marketing. So the idea, right? Slack years ago said that they were like, we don't think we'll ever have a traditional sales team. That was what their CEO said. And, no shade, like you learn, right? You grow and you learn, but they have a very decent sized sales team. So does Notion. So does, Figma, like all these tools that we look up to and we say, all my clients, Intercom, Zendesk, Twilio, they all have massive sales teams. Yeah. So I think that there's, if you're going to go down the route of saying, I want a product-led growth model, especially if you're doing B2B, not B2C, B2C is a different game. But if you're doing a B2B
Yeah.
Get used to the idea that you're going to need to do product-led sales. You're going to need to maximize on your growth engine. And it's the sales team that can maximize your contracts. They're the ones that can go and get you an enterprise level deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess there's a point of diminishing returns as well in terms of the amount of money that you're putting into R&D to the point where it stops driving that value. How is, if you were speaking to any founders out there who are going through this actual process as well, now I've come across founders who are very reluctant to move away from product-led growth as well.
Sure.
They're firm believers in it. And how would you identify where that point of diminishing return begins?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I know like a quantitative answer to that, but what I would say on your journey, if you're hitting the $5 million ARR mark, you're probably thinking about a sales team. So, if you're kind of there, if you're before that, I understand why you might not be thinking it. And then if you think about companies getting bigger, they're going to have more motions. And that's, I think, the thing is PLG, it's a company strategy, but it's a sales motion. And, there's nothing wrong with inputting more motions. And we're giving these motions names, like event-led is another thing that I'm hearing a lot. Community-led growth. The idea is, can we invest in these areas in order to create leads? We're renaming things or rebranding things. It's fine. We have new terms for it, but you're going to have multiple motions as a company if you really want to get to that $100 million level. So I would say it depends on your dreams. If you are happy, kind of hitting 5 million ARR, and again, no issue, that's congratulations, that's amazing. And you want to keep product led and you want to maximize on that, great. If you're trying to get huge, you're going to want a sales team and you're going to want other motions as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jen, would you say that you can start with a PLG business model and then evolve into an enterprise kind of in parallel? Is it easier to do it that way around? Or is it easier to do it the other way around and start with a traditional sales process with a sales team running the deals and then gradually insert the right events so that you can do a PLG model?
They're both hard. So I don't know that there's pros and cons, and some things are easier than others, right? Like sales teams are humans. PLG is building a product that's easy for users to use. Like it's both sides. HubSpot has a really interesting story because you don't see a lot of you don't see as many use cases of companies that start out with a big sales team and then move into PLG. So HubSpot's an interesting one, also in a category that you would not think could do it. When they built their CRM, that was free trial. That was a free platform that they were using. And so that's actually a really incredible story where they've really managed to build an entire self-serve product that didn't cannibalize from their marketing platform. So I would look at that case study if you are a company with like a really, really solidified sales team that wants to move into PLG. They decided basically to create a startup within a startup that did it. So they're kind of interesting. There's a lot of case studies of product companies that then introduce sales. So, from that perspective, I would say it's easier that way because more companies are doing it. There's more playbooks for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about something that we spoke about before we hit the record button as well. And so when we're talking about the problems or the opportunity areas that you address, some of it is to do with how organizations are set up. Operating in silos is something that I've come across regularly within my career and at different companies as well. And it can be really difficult to get these silos to come together and start working in a cohesive manner. How do you go around firstly identifying that there is a problem over there in terms of the way these companies are operating, and how do you engage them enough to get them to the point where they want to move away and break out from silos?
Yeah, and we're talking about PLG a little bit, and I would say this is for any company. Anybody's going to deal with this. PLG companies have it a little bit harder too when you're trying to introduce product-led sales because you're now introducing a product silo as well into the equation. It's kind of the great unifier. If you're going to nail PLG, you really have to have a super unified company because it touches everything. But let me pull back and just say a little bit of a story. So silo syndrome was a term that was coined by this gentleman, Phil Enser, in the 80s. He worked at Goodyear, and his job was to build cross-functional teams, and he had a really hard time doing it. He ultimately became a researcher on it. And he learned a couple of things that have really stayed with me. One is teams are really good vertically. So that's why it's a silo. We're very good at, like, the marketing team will be all pretty aligned. Like, you don't typically hear about misalignment within that team, or the sales team will be pretty aligned. It's just a horizontal communication is very difficult in the way that we work and the way that we structure things. And it's human nature. So this isn't ugly. This isn't bad. This isn't people not trying to work together. And so, and the other thing that his research says that I hope is happening less, but top down communication strong, bottom up is hard, right? So you'll typically see management kind of in any visual about this in its own bubble at the top. So he died. He said he didn't really figure it out, but you know that we learned a lot about him. Yeah. And I know I'm going on a little bit of a rant, but I'll kind of stop and say, okay, there's a few signs of silo syndrome, and maybe you guys can say whether or not you're feeling these, but I'm going to give one example. I'll give you all of them and I'll dig into one. So information hoarding, a lack of collaboration, misalignment in different languages, built across the teams, internal competitiveness, and then team-based identity, feeling like you're more part of your team than you are the company. So like, I'm more part of the marketing team than I am part of Go Nimbly. So you probably are already like, whenever we do this, people nod their heads and go like, okay, yeah, we have some of these. Information hoarding is an interesting one to go into, which is, it sounds ugly. It sounds like I'm not sharing information, but imagine I do some analysis and I find out that directors of RevOps convert higher than other personas in the data.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to hoard that, but like, how do I give that to the right people in a 600-person organization? Post it on Slack, hope it gets to the right hands. So a lot of it is just our process, the way that we communicate. It's the work behind the work. And that's what makes it really hard. It's not typically malice.
Yeah. And what kind of process can you put in place in that instance? Because I understand exactly where you're coming from. I've worked at bigger companies and smaller companies.
Oh, there you go. It has to fit that one in every time.
And everything in between. And often what I find is that at the bigger companies, that's where, in terms of information hoarding and the inability to share, it does happen over there a lot. But in the smaller companies, at times what I find is there's an element of oversharing as well, which can also, and I'm not, everyone should be able to share in a safe environment, which is fine. But at points it can turn into an inefficient use of time if done at a regular cadence where it's information that's not necessarily needed. So how do you put the right structures in place and particularly protect the information?
So let me actually yes and you a little bit. So you talked about the problems at big companies versus little companies. This is the funny thing about silo syndrome. You're going to feel it most when you're growing. And it's because the change in number of employees, the degree of specialization, the number of units and the number of incentive mechanisms are what make it go rampant. It makes us all point at different directions. It makes us all report lots of different things, have to move through lots of different humans. So the more successful and the more growth you have, the more you're going to have to combat this. So I'm not surprised by your experience. It's not that hard to break down silos between 5 people. Like, that's it. Don't hire me if you're a 5-person team. I'm just going to tell you to like meet once a week and discuss your business. So the solves are much harder when you're in a larger organization. And I like frameworks, which is why I keep going back to them. But you're going to have either like people silos, process silos, tech and data silos, figure out which one it is. The example I gave is a people one. I don't know how to share, but it could be as simple as, why don't people have access to that dashboard? Another little story, I worked with a Series B company and we were moving from founder-led sales to a sales team. So taught everybody everything, all the playbooks, things were good, but they just weren't converting as well as the CEO. Thought, sure, that makes sense. Then we listened to some calls and we found that, the CEO would do things like, I noticed, in the product you didn't do XYZ. Can I teach you? Sounds like you're stuck here. Let me help you. Asked really good questions. And the sales team wasn't doing that. And then we went like, why aren't you talking about their product usage? Like, we don't have access to that. It's like, why don't you have access to the product use data? We like built it. We didn't get logins. Well, crap. We caught it very quickly, but it's like, that's a big tech silo. Like we just didn't give them and enable them on a product that they should obviously have access to. So
I've got a lot of questions around data fluency and data access. So one of them is around the level, the certifications you now need to have, and like some of them are preventing you from actually putting that transparency in place to start with, where you can have teams who have only access to a specific set of data and others who can't read that data.
Sure.
How do you break those silos when there are legal constraints built around
We've worked with some healthcare companies, and you obviously can't share a lot of data. And also there's actually a good amount of infrastructure and access that you have to build in order to IPO and be, compliant. So we've played in that game before. I honestly don't think it's that complicated if you take the time to really think about, what do I lean on. Hey, read only for as much information that isn't private to the customer. Let people see it, because it's not confusing when two people are talking. They're saying like, oh, you can't see that, I can see it. So more read rather than not. I lean that way. And then, most platforms these days, I know some don't, but like we work in the Salesforce ecosystem a lot. You can go down to the field and say what anybody can see or view, etc. It's just, you really have to think about the structure, or it's a nightmare. Salesforce used to run on profiles and roles. They're moving off of it. So if anybody listening is like starting their Salesforce journey, permission sets, it's, way easier and honestly makes a lot more sense. You'll have like a permission set for usage, who can see, who can edit, who can write, and really work on it that way.
Yeah.
But, compliance first, then you could talk access.
Yeah. And you also spoke, Jen, around, you spoke about event-led processes when we do PLG. Sorry, we're jumping back in topics, but where's the starting point of where you've got enough events that you can track a specific compelling behavior versus just not enough, and then shooting yourself in the foot?
Sure. I'm gonna pull that back if that's okay. I mean, you're touching campaign attribution, you're talking signals, you're talking MQL definition. I am of the mind that what we've done is we've created these like fake funnels within our organization. I hope it's okay to swear on this podcast. I call it like internal bullshit that you kind of like are creating that your customer doesn't like and doesn't need. And so we have our PLG funnel, then we have our sales-led funnel, and then maybe you have your event-led funnel, and then we're talking about marketing source versus sales source, etc. I'm not here to say that those metrics aren't important to track, just that when what I like to do is strip it back and think about, okay, I'm trying to identify a person in my database, whatever that means, a prospect who is sales ready. Could even be a customer. They need a human-led moment. And so I'm going to look at their usage if they have it. I'm going to look at their demographics to make sure they're an ICP. Otherwise, I don't want to waste my time. I'm going to look at their demographics and get a sense of, maybe some routing logic in there, but who's most important for me to talk to. I'm going to look at marketing information. So whether they went to events, what event, etc., maybe web pages. And then I'm going to look at third-party intent. And I'm going to create a machine that looks at all those things and identifies and says, hey, this person, we need to talk to them right now. And so, for me, it's very unlikely that one event is going to be, the moment in which somebody is now ready to talk to us and buy a lot. But if we can get very good at creating it doesn't even have to be machine learning here. It could be intuition. It's fine. But like, what mix of those things means that somebody needs to have a conversation, and then I can route it to the right person.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of what we're talking about is around ensuring that the right processes are in place and the correct infrastructure is in place as well. Yep. And what I've seen a lot of the time is, depending on the growth of the company or where it is within its growth trajectory, that's where, your example, with the founder who was doing the selling, having been exposed to specific information he could use while the rest of the sales teams didn't, as an example. Is this because there's a lack of a function that's set up, or is it a lack of awareness, or what is it? And how do you identify when it is you need to introduce that RevOps function within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally biased here. I think the earlier that you have an amazing operator, the better. I think operators can keep you from, and now that we're in this, I honestly think operators are about to have their, best decade, because we're really thinking about how to streamline processes, how to get more productivity out of, the teams that we have. 5 years ago, if you got budget, you just you just hired 5 AEs. You didn't think about how to make them have a higher carry capacity. And that's what a great revenue operator will do for you. They will streamline the processes so much. They will think about where our biggest conversion issue is, and they'll throw themselves at that, so that you don't have to hire 5 AEs. You could do the same with 3. So I do think that, there's the moment that you've got money and you're thinking about, hiring sales versus an operator, I urge you to hire like a really business-minded, great, like operator that can unify teams. You can always outsource the tech. You can always outsource the build with like part-time architect and a part-time developer. So I would focus on bringing somebody that's going to know my business deeply and really identify those gaps in those areas, and start building basically operational excellence, because we've all been in orgs where you go in and you go, oh boy, we got a lot of cleanup to do, and refactoring is very expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've had a few RevOps guests on the podcast as well. And one of the topics that I find particularly interesting myself is when you're coming in as a consultancy, as an example, it's a cost, it's an investment that you're making. How, from a RevOps perspective, are you able to demonstrate ROI, or how do you do that?
Yeah, well, there's 2, probably more, but there's 2 major reasons why somebody's coming, what kind of pain they're feeling when they're buying services. Yeah. And one of them might just be, and if you're doctors, right, there's like, all right, there's pain right now. There is a problem, you're sick, and we got to fix it. Those are the easy ones, right? Like you just double the size of the sales team, your routing isn't working, you need to re-implement routing, and you need to make sure that your team is enabled to prioritize the right leads and have an outbound sequence that works. Like pretty quickly, I can benchmark before and after. I can tell you what we increased. I can tell you, the ROI of that. That's easy. That's project based. And actually, operators should be doing that all the time. Like when you have a win, take a second, go benchmark right when you deployed it. Go benchmark it again, and you could tell that story the next quarter when you're talking about, what's great about what you did. We overthink it. Back of the napkin math is your friend here. Yeah. And we can learn a lot from marketing attribution too. It's like no one project did it. Of course, there were other things that were going on in the business that increased lead flow. Like you could just say you influenced it. Then there's the general, which is like, hey, we need help. We're a little lost. We need help. And those are the harder ROI conversations, because we just don't know what projects and what we're going to do. So you kind of have to lean on sometimes like, we're going to get you to the next inflection point. So we might not have ROI, but I can say, okay, there's no way this company scales to 50 salespeople in the way that you've, architected your systems, or the way that your team is designed. So we're going to help you get to that next threshold. And that's usually the conversation is. And internal teams can do this too. It's like, hey, we're working towards this inflection point, and you align yourself to that.
Gotcha.
Very good. I've got a question around more the synergy between the teams when RevOps is involved, because we see very different setups where RevOps might be the clients of other teams, but in some cases you got other teams being the client of RevOps. What would you advise RevOps to do in today's market? Like how are you the most successful as a RevOps?
To your kind of first breakdown, I like the analogy that we always talk about, which is, for us, the revenue operators are the directors and our go-to-market team are the actors. And we're just trying to make a movie together. And so the thing that the RevOps team is trying to do is make that super easy, right? We're like creating, making sure they've got scripts and making sure they know where to go, and making sure they have food and access to, anything that they need on set. That's the work that we're doing. So I don't think about, like, our customer is our customer. Everybody's customer is the same. We should all be thinking about that customer. My go-to-market team are my users. Like, I'm creating essentially an internal product, and I'm really thinking about, what is it that they need in order to get them successful, which is having a really incredible experience with their customer. And I think sometimes if you become a support function, it's one of the reasons, I think it can work. I'll caveat this, but it's one of the reasons why you don't want operators working directly for, marketing or directly for sales or directly for CS, because they will just that's their boss. They're going to just start taking whatever they want. Yep, I got it. And it's not through bad intent, but if those leaders are not super aligned and if those leaders are not defining the work well, then you just created the same problem again. So that's why we want this like organizational unit that is thinking about that team, but is not necessarily being given the work and giving orders by that team.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think we are almost out of time, Jen,
Sure.
but we've got a bit of a tradition on the show. It's probably the most general question you'll ever hear, but do your best to answer it. So within your whole career so far, what is your best memory?
Ooh, that's so nice. Okay. We did our not first, but when I worked at Bluewolf, we did what we called OSW, offsite workshop, and the whole company would get together. And I wanted that tradition. I remember when I first started Go Nimbly, I was like, I want enough money to bring everyone together. And that's always been, my a really big driver, especially I would say post-COVID. So we had to delay ours. We call ours camp, but we had to delay ours by 2.5 years. But I got to bring the whole company to Spain. So we saved 2.5 years of, camp budget. And I brought 30 some odd people to Spain where I grew up. They all met me in Madrid beforehand on their own accord, because that's where I was. I got to take them to my favorite restaurant, which is El Cantábrico. It's a place where you get shrimp. And then we all went to Ibiza and spent 2 days talking about how to get focus at work and have a better relationship with work. And it was so rad and so beautiful. And I think a memory I'll carry with me for a long time.
I bet it sounds like an amazing memory. Well, Jen, Thank you very much for joining us. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Joint Flows. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.